Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I want to just begin also by expressing my gratitude to the Garrison Institute for being a part of this august body and this labor of love for us. Who could have imagined that our science and our practice could have somehow cohered with our inner life? Such nice times we live in. Today, I want to make some summary notes, probably at about 3,000 feet compared to some of Adele's comments at 30 feet, regarding contemplative science. And contemplative science can be understood as the scientific description and explanation of the effects of mental training, as it's called. And what we really want to know is if someone like me, through training, and whatever that is, it could be any of the number of things that we've talked about, can become a calmer and happier person, perhaps more insightful and empathic, insight into both ourselves and other people, and hopefully act on those insights to be more compassionate and to contribute to the well-being of others. And I see contemplative education, the practical side of this, as a secondary field of study that's emerging. And this is really about how to take the insights of contemplative science and use them to optimize human development through acts of teaching and learning, whether that occurs in schools, in homes, in after-school settings, or wherever. I want to build on the metaphor of the tree of contemplative practices that Mark introduced last night from the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society. But I also want to narrow the focus of my talk not to things like storytelling and song and dance, although I think art as meditation is, as we've heard, as old as human beings in the Lascaux caves in the south of France. But I really want to focus on formal contemplative practices today. And I want to use the metaphor of the tree to really talk about how contemplative science is first and foremost interested in what kind of human beings do we want. Second, we could call that the fruits of the tree of contemplative practice. And those fruits come after or are a manifestation of the flowering of those practices at the level of the body and the brain and the mind. And the branches, as we saw in the previous, could be considered the contemplative practices. The trunk is the wisdom that binds those practices together. What are they about? And then contemplative science, as it's configured right now for reasons we could discuss, really arises out of what His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls the Sanskritic traditions of India. That is, those contemplative traditions that use Sanskrit as their basis. Of course, we're in a translational process of taking that work from that soil to here, and that's another discussion that will happen in the afternoon. So I want to focus sort of on the top half of this graph. Before I do that, though, I want to say what is the point of doing any of this? And in India, I got this little card once that said, for the realization of self and for the good of the world. And so I think, as Mark was saying last night, the reason that the science has focused a lot on the individual is that's a really important part of what we're about here. Obviously, if it's only about the self and it's not selfless and in service of others, then that's not what we're talking about here. So to begin this journey, quick journey into contemplative science, I'd like to start with the wisdom. And to do that, I thought I would just project some pictures in silence to allow us to sort of have a visual contemplation here. So you can just sit upright if you wish, as we heard in that beautiful voice this morning. And isn't it always the voice? We can take a few deep breaths, and then I'll just slowly switch through about 6 or 7 slides. I teach a course at Portland State University called Contemplative Psychology and Education, in which students indeed get credit for learning mindfulness. And I had to figure out a way to condense it down to some essential teachings from essential teachers. Just breathe sounds like a good one. Be here now, Ram Dass, let go. Sharon Salzberg, and I remember her saying in this very hall, it's all about beginning again. So, I'm upset, taking a breath, being here now. God, I wish it had come out some other way, letting that expectation go. What do I do now? Start over. Beginning again, beginning again. It's all about beginning again. Why am I reminding us of some of these basic teachings? It turns out that the word mindfulness in Pali is sati, which can be literally translated as memory. And in Sanskrit, it's smriti, which can be translated literally as that which is remembered. And so a hypothesis that I want to explore with respect to just breathe, be here now, letting go, and beginning again is that contemplative practices aim to help us remember to do those things by affecting our memory systems. And those memory systems are actually what constitute what we call self. I won't go there today, but it's just something that we could talk about. And so let us talk a little about 3 or 4 specific contemplative practices that we find in a lot of these secularized interventions, both for adults and for kids more today. And the basic idea here is that by engaging in these practices, we can train our brains, change our mind, and by changing ourselves, we change the world because, of course, we're part of the world. Doesn't mean that's the only thing we change in the world, but starting with ourselves, well, that's Gandhi's insight. If we want the world to be kinder, we should be kinder. And the basis for this idea in contemplative science is that training, that process of familiarization or memorization or affecting our memory happens through learning or neuroplasticity. And I don't assume basic knowledge in the audience, so I just wanted to use a 2-minute video to show you what neuroplasticity is. This is the idea or the scientific fact that the wiring or the structure and the functioning of the brain are malleable or plastic, and as Adele was telling us, that means that the brain is really subject to modification by experience, especially intentional action. So we noticed that physical exercise can affect EFs, but as Adele said, much better when that physical exercise is coupled with high intentionality in the form of yoga or martial arts. So we will see a...
Booyah! Good morning, internets! First and foremost, if you like my videos, click like down below because it enlarges my EP. Secondly, do you have any idea how awesome your brain is? It is very awesome. Simply put, neuroplasticity means that your brain can rewire itself. This means that whatever you are doing actually affects your brain's physical structure as well as functionality. For instance, have a group of people practice juggling for a few months. Put them under a PET scanner and you will see visible changes in the brain regions involved in juggling. Visible PET scan changes also occur in successful psychotherapy or even in changes from negative to positive thinking. Meaning that everything you do from juggling to being happy can in fact be trained by reprogramming your brain. So, realize that your brain is learning all the time. Be aware of what you're teaching it. If you're being pessimistic, you're teaching it to be pessimistic. So teach it to be awesome. And don't assume that certain skills or mindsets are beyond you because you don't have them right now. That's the same as saying you can't work out because you can't lift a 400-pound dumbbell. Your brain is a muscle. Train it. And never use your initial limitations or failures as the rationale for giving up. I don't breathe during these videos.
Booyah is all I can say to you guys. Wah! Neuroplasticity. So how do we do that? How do we take advantage of this plastic part of the brain through repeated and intentional action? And so what I wanted to do was just quickly go through 3 or 4 basic practices. These are all familiar to you who are familiar with MBSR or yoga. Things like concentration and insight meditation, metta or loving kindness practice, and then things that really focus on the body. And again, these are formal practices, and I just want to focus in on them and tell you a little about what we know. So concentration meditation could be defined as sustaining attention on a chosen object of meditation, for instance, the breath. And then what we do is we begin again, focusing on my breath. Man, I'm hungry. Whoa, beginning again. focusing on the breath, breath coming in, breath coming out, breath coming in, breath coming out, sustained attention, wondering about my girlfriend, coming back to the breath, beginning again, let go of that, begin again. And so this process is very obviously an initial step, and we think it flexes the flabby muscle of the prefrontal cortex in the anterior cruciate cingulate. And some of the main outcomes that we found from this kind of one-pointed meditation are relaxation. The relaxation response comes from allowing the mind to rest on a single thing, as Herbert Benson showed us, and it develops this quality in particular that Adele was talking about as sustained attention as one of these executive functions. And so we think that this exercising of the prefrontal cortex to bring our minds back to an object over and over strengthens our ability to be focused, and it also strengthens our working memory. It reminds us what's happening. Oh, wait a minute, what am I doing? And that's called monitoring or conflict monitoring. We're actually learning to remember what we're doing in the practice of concentration meditation. Not only am I bringing my attention back, but I have to keep in mind, what am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to be fantasizing about food? Oh no, I'm supposed to be meditating, right. And this is really an important thing when we're teaching or doing anything. What am I doing? What was I supposed to be doing? The key point of this is coming back again. And what's so cool is even if your mind goes away, coming back again is strengthening your ability to monitor if you're on task or not. So there is nothing, being on the breath or knowing that you're off the breath are equally important for developing your prefrontal cortex. The second thing we know, I love it, everyone keeps saying breathe. Maria wants to remember to breathe. We know that the physiology of the breath, and Mark Greenberg taught me this at a conference once, has to do with the stimulation of a specific nerve on the out-breath called the vagus nerve. And so even though Mark said we might want to go beyond just breathing when it comes to our contemplative practice, I think we could all start here and stay here for a long time. And so on every out-breath, we get a little bit of rest. There's a stimulation of what's called the parasympathetic rest and digest system. And every out-breath we take, we get a little rest, unless we're not doing that. And how many times have you gotten in a fight with your partner and looked at them and said, geez, they're breathing shallowly. This is trouble. There's no rest. It's all fight, fright, flight stuff going on. So taking a deep breath and lengthening that out breath will stimulate this nerve and give us rest. The second kind of meditation that's been studied, and I need to hurry up here a little, is called open monitoring or insight meditation, or what many people would even think about as mindfulness or objectless meditation. And this can be defined as attending to whatever arises in the stream of consciousness or your awareness and letting oneself be affected by it without reaction. Simple. And you couldn't see it, I'm sorry, this clock says now, you are here, and the idea is to be here now, present-centered awareness, non-judgmental to whatever is arising, as John Kabat-Zinn would say. And so this is more of an open monitoring, seeing what happens. And the evidence seems to suggest that one of the primary outcomes of this kind of non-object focused meditation, open monitoring, is less emotional reactivity. That is, I'm allowing stimuli to come up without actually having to say, whatever it is. Less rumination. Oh, there goes my lack of self-confidence thing again. I don't have to get carried away on it. And greater insight into the self if you can actually, instead of reacting to what's happening, just take a breath and see, who knows what opens up. In fact, that's probably the place of creativity. And we have some ideas about the underlying mechanisms, which I believe goes to the question about hypervigilance and mindfulness last night. And the basic idea is that, our brain, I think, is sort of a threat detector. That's, survival first, then reproduction, survival first, then reproduction, survival. So we're constantly scanning the environment for threats, and the idea is to allow that possibility to happen without doing anything about it. Just watching it. And over time, it appears that we sort of, by being exposed to stimuli but not acting in the same way habitually, we reduce that sort of habit pattern through what we think is a memory process of exposure to something, extinction of our old habit, of how we react to it, and a reconsolidation of a new habit. Oh, when feeling threatened, take a deep breath rather than swearing at the person. And this is what could be called procedural memory, like riding a bike, as Adele's saying. Over time, if I do this repetitively, where certain things that bother me, I take a breath instead of acting out on them, I can actually change the routinized habits that I have in my brain. So that's another form of memory that's implicated in this. And in addition, the second habit that comes up is when we have negative thoughts about ourselves, we tend to get really carried away and believe them. If we can just have those thoughts come up, notice them, and take a breath, perhaps, we can reduce things like rumination and worry, and we see that in studies all the time, especially with adolescents. Mark talked about it yesterday, reduce rumination through yoga and the like. And really the key of this is not just breathing, but the idea is letting go of our tendency to react. That's where the letting go comes in. I have to speed up here a little. Sustaining, the last one I want to talk about in depth is loving kindness meditation. This is where we sustain attention on a chosen object, often ourselves, then our loved ones, then maybe people who are more distant, and then maybe if we get to the AP course, our people we have trouble with. And so we want to sustain attention on those memories of those people, because what we're doing is sitting there recalling memories of these people, including ourselves, and then we imbue that object with positive emotion. May you be safe. May you be happy, Robert. May you be filled with peace. And what we think the effect of this is first of all, we're priming ourselves to be more, to engage in more positive emotion rather than, where's the threat? Where's the threat? Where's the threat? So we're cultivating a positive emotional state to counteract our tendency to be threat detectors. And what we found in a study we did is we believe it imbues those recalled memories with more positive affect. That is, we asked teachers in a study to focus on their most challenging student for a week and practice metta for them, practice loving kindness. And then we did a pre and post asking them to tell us about this kid. And then we analyzed the features of their language, and it turned out the teachers said at post-test, controlling for where they were in the beginning, they used a lot more positive affect when they were describing their most challenging student. And the question is, why is that? We believe it had to do with their memory to some degree. That is, they were recalling their perception of this little troublemaker, and then they were, which is a certain kind of memory, and then they were reconsolidating it with this positive sense of, we want you to be happy. And so when we asked them, tell us about this student, we assume they recalled that memory and the experiences, and they actually see that student differently. So the cushion practice can potentially, hypothetically, have transfer. Of course, we would have to know, were they really being nicer to them? And so we can change our mind by changing the nature of our memories and our perceptions of things through practice. Oh boy, yoga. I love all the yogis in the room. I started with yoga, the body scan. The last really key mechanism of effect is that by focusing our attention in an intentional way on the body, we can really increase our awareness of our somatic experience and our sensory experience, both internally and externally. And it turns out that because the brain was designed for the social things, it wasn't really about me in the beginning. If I can understand my own physical experience and emotional experience, those same brain areas are useful for understanding your emotional experience and physical experience. So there could be a direct tie, although the science has not shown it definitively yet, between becoming more aware of your own body and being more empathic in the world. All right, so in summary, there's 3 pathways of effect that contemplative science is starting to elucidate. Enhanced regulation of attention in terms of executive functioning, the use of that executive functioning and attention to enhance our ability to regulate our emotion states. And then these practices tend also to transform the way that we process information about our body. Oh, I'm getting upset. Maybe we start to catch our emotions in our body before they've bloomed into negative words. In terms of our understanding, oh, maybe that old rumination and narrative stuff is just a thought. It's not actually who I am. It comes and goes. And in our understanding of other people, oh, they want to be happy just like me. I want to end with a few notes on the historical moment, because Tish brought it up, and I think she's absolutely right. I think there's a few things going on here that are really fortuitous for the work. The work began in 2000, at least as I traced the history to some of the programs, to a meeting in Dharamsala. And as the spiral has unfolded, there's just been an enormous amount of activity with respect to child, parent, and teacher programs since that 2000 meeting by many of you in the room. And if you really think about it, developmentally, we actually now have programs that span the entire lifespan almost. And for a developmental scientist, how exciting. We don't know much about the effects of these yet, but wow, there's programs that have been developed for almost every age kid. Our own approach has been put on your oxygen mask first, adults, and then help your child with theirs. Here, the second thing I want to say is young people today are the most self-aware generation in the history of the world. These people are highly connected. They grew up in the internet age. In the United States and in other countries, this is the largest and most racially diverse and ideologically tolerant generation since the greatest generation. And in fact, it's hypothesized that this generation is a civic generation, very much like the generation under FDR. And these kids, as far as I can tell, love mindfulness. Richard Brady was saying he went to Google. They're doing this for all of the kids in Google, and they're kids, right? These are 18 to 25-year-olds, and they freaking love it. So this generation runs from 9-year-olds to 30-year-olds. I have a feeling mindfulness is really, really mission consistent for this group. And they're going to change the country, if not the planet, we hope. And so that brings us to the last point, and then I'll stop. Wow, could we need mindful, compassionate citizens more, given that the world is increasingly hot, increasingly globalized, and increasingly crowded, huge problems. And so I think a lot of us are obviously thinking about new forms of education in this age of global challenge. How can we take advantage of neuroplasticity? That's what educators have been doing forever. We just didn't call it neuroplasticity, we called it learning. And we might have some new techniques called familiarization. How can we think about optimizing human development, not just along subject matter knowledge, but what are being called these non-cognitive or social emotional competencies? So thank you very much for your attention.